This video is part 2 of the lecture series for week 2 of the course Career and Employment Resources. If you have not already watched video 1, please do go watch that lecture first, as it will set you up for the remainder of the information we're going to cover in this session. When we ended off at the end of the first video, we were looking at the career life planning model displayed in a slightly different and more dynamic way, and we had talked about these different arrows and clients reviewing, evaluating, and adjusting, and so on within the 3 stages. Now what I'd like to talk about are the different roles that a career development practitioner might play within this model. And so you and other practitioners, you may play different roles in your work depending on the client's stage. So part of what you would do with the model is to determine what the client stage is, and then the activities that you would choose to do with the client and the information that you would provide them with and the resources you would share, all of that would fit with their particular stage. And this would be part of your role if it's prescribed that way within your agency or whatever organization that you're working in. So different roles may be embedded all into one job, or they may be organized into separate jobs and roles, and I'll show you what I mean by that in just a moment. It's important to understand these different roles so that you will be clear about what you can do to help the client and when you need to refer them to another professional. Going back to the more dynamic version of the model that we looked at in the previous video, we can then begin to consider how different roles that you might play out in the field fit into each part of the model. If you have a client who comes in and is really starting from the beginning and really has very little knowledge of self and how to market themselves, they are having trouble articulating their skills and qualities and so on. So you would be focused initially on this part of the model to help them generate who am I information. You may do that as a career counselor or an advisor or a coach. There are many other job titles. We'll look at that in just a moment. But essentially, regardless of your job title, what you would be doing with the client is, if they are in this stage, is you're helping them to connect with resources and doing activities that will help them generate knowledge of self. Could be an online assessment tool, could be discussions that you're having with the client face-to-face using a narrative technique or constructivist counseling or some other approach, but you're doing work with the client in this stage of the model to help them generate information about themselves. In the second part of the model, if the client is now in the what's out there stage, where they need to know about work, different types of work, and learning pathways and so on, you need to know about occupations that are out there and sources of information to provide that type of information to clients, and how to prepare or qualify for certain fields and so on. Now, there are literally thousands upon thousands of different occupations as well as educational programs. So you don't have to know all of that information. You don't have to have all of that memorized. So you don't need to worry that, you don't have enough information here. All of the information is easily accessible once you learn where to find it. So you just need to know where to find the information, and that's part of what you're learning in this course. There is a role out in the field that in some places is called career and employment information specialist. Other places may have different titles for it, but essentially in this part of the role, whether it's part of your job or this is your primary role, what you are doing is being responsible to be able to provide this kind of what's out there information to clients. You would specialize in knowing about these sources of information. And as an example, you might work in a career center or an agency, and you might be the specialist who compiles the resources that everybody else goes to. And so you're kind of almost like a librarian for current employment information and resources. And part of your role is to ensure that all the resources are organized and up to date and relevant to the clients who are needing to access this information. So again, most roles out in the field, even if you're not specializing in this, do require some knowledge in this area. And again, that's part of what you're learning through this course, is how to access that information. And then lastly, you may be in a role where you are helping clients to nail down their action plan and put it into motion. So you are helping the client with the how do I get their information and resources. And Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. You might do that as an employment counselor. It might be an extension of your role here as a career and employment information specialist. So you're helping clients to find information about how to apply to work, for example. So they're developing job hunting strategies, writing resumes, preparing for interviews, and also applying for academic programs so that you might be supporting or helping a client to take those kinds of concrete steps. Working in this field, you may do one, two, or all three of these roles, and you do need to understand the difference between them and have resources available to share in all areas, depending on the clients that you're working with and what role you are playing with in your organization. There may be, for example, situations where you're working in, let's say, an Employment Ontario agency where you are doing most of the information in the Who Am I and What's Out There part of the process. You're providing that information to clients and leading them through activities. And then when they're actually ready, they're ready to go and look for work, they're ready to actually take those steps, that you might then pass them off to someone who might be considered, let's say, a job developer, or may have some other specialized role where that's all they concentrate on is the how do I get there phase. So important for you to know where you fit into this model when you are working in the field. There may in fact be an area of this model that you really want to specialize in. Although I have done all three of these things, I've always really enjoyed the Who Am I part of the process, helping clients to do assessment tools and learn more about themselves, and allowing that to then lead them to occupations that they feel passionate about. So as a foundational block, I've always enjoyed this part of the model a great deal, but I'm able to do all three. And I enjoy activities, and all of these is just that doing the Who Am I stuff is something that I particularly enjoy with assessment tools and assessment processes. A question that often comes up for students in this field in looking at this model is, first of all, how do I know if the client is in one of these stages? Well, it's not that hard to assess if you're doing a full assessment process, but little examples of how clients might be in the Who Am I stage would be if you ask them, what are your strengths and weaknesses, and they're really not able to answer that question. Or how would you describe your personality? If an employer asked you that question in an interview, how would you describe yourself? And they really can't answer that question. So when you're asking them questions about themselves and they're just really not able to respond to those questions, chances are they're in the Who Am I stage. And even if they maybe know that information, but they're not able to express it, it's very important that you work with them at that stage first and help them get clear about, how do they want to answer those kinds of questions. If a client is definitely clear about who they are and they've got good knowledge of self and they're able to respond to those types of questions, then you want to move on to the What's Out There stage, and you can tell if a client's in this stage because you would ask them, let's say they want to be a nurse. Well, what do you know about nursing? What do you know about, what do you think the positives are in nursing? What do you think the challenges might be? And what do you know about how to get trained as a nurse? So if the client really doesn't have any of that information and they can't respond to those questions, then they're likely in the What's Out There stage. And a clear sign that they're in What's Out There is that they haven't made a choice. They haven't made a decision. They might be thinking about some things, but they haven't actually decided clearly what they want to pursue, whether it's education or a particular type of career. How do you know if someone's in the How Do I Get There stage? Well, they've done all the work here. They're able to easily articulate who they are. They have a good handle on what's available to them as far as occupations that fit with who they are, as well as learning pathways and or qualifications for a field. But now they need help with really pretty concrete tools. So, for example, if they're ready to start applying for jobs, they're clear about what they're targeting, here at this stage, they will probably need help with developing or polishing a resume, being able to answer interview questions. So they would do mock interviews, having a cover letter ready, knowing how to kind of navigate through applying online to all the different employer portals and all the different ways that they ask people to apply online. So that's how you can tell if a client is in one of those stages. And you always want to try to default to the first stage and be clear that this is where the client, that they have done the foundational work here. before you move on, and then they've done the foundational work here, and then you get to the how do I get there stage. A question that also comes up is, how do you help your client understand this model and be willing to work through it? So as I said in the first video, there's no question that it's a challenge, especially if you have clients who want to start with, how do I get there? Tell me what to do right now so I have a job tomorrow. What you can do is show them a simplified version of the model and briefly explain each step and how each one is important. You don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but just say, these are sort of the foundational steps that we need to cover and that I can help you with. And then you can ask the client, where do you think you are in the model? And if they say, I'm how do I get there? I'm ready to go, and you can tell they probably aren't. Sometimes you can put it to the test just in a gentle way, saying things like, okay, you always want to be where the client is. I've talked about this principle before. So, okay, I can hear that you're really ready to go and you're so eager to find work. Let me just ask you a couple of questions. So imagine that you're out in a job interview and I ask you to tell me about your best skills or strengths. Would you be able to answer that question? And then let them answer. Or if I asked you, what are your weaknesses? Would you be able to answer that question? And just get a sense. You don't want to frustrate the client, and you don't want to say, hey, like, back the truck up. We've got to go all the way back to the beginning here, and this is going to take time. We got to slow it down. You don't want to frustrate the client that way. Just help them understand that we do need to follow this process. It does work. It's helped lots of other clients find work. It's going to lead you to employment. We're going to work through this as quickly as we possibly can, but we don't want to cut corners. We really want to prepare you properly for a job search and to make a good career decision. So in terms of job search, to make sure that when you get out there to do job interviews, that you really are ready, and we want to really prepare you as fully as we can. You also need to be clear with the client about which roles you can play at the beginning, and sometimes that's already all spelled out for them by the time you get to meet with them, but make sure that they understand, for example, that you will lead them through part of this process, and if it's the case, that you might then hand them off to a job developer who will work with them. So it's just really important that you understand where your role fits within the field and make sure that your clients understand, so that they're not shocked when you get all of this work done and then you say, okay, now I'm going to pass you on to the job developer. One of the other things that, I'm just going to go on to the next slide, one of the other things that complicates this picture for you as a practitioner and your clients is that there are a huge range of roles and job titles that are used in the field. And you've probably discovered this yourself. You've been getting more exposure to the field through the program. So it can be confusing for clients and even practitioners to understand the differences in roles and job titles. So I'm going to just stop the PowerPoint here for a moment, and I'm going to go to a website. I'm going to go to the NOC website. You were introduced to the NOC back in the fall in the theories course, where you can see all different kinds of job titles and all different kinds of information. So I'm just going to click on, I did go to the NOC and do a search for employment counselors. And all of these titles come up. This is a fairly extensive list of titles, and it's not even complete. So there's no job developer on this list. There are probably other roles that kind of get at it, but job developer is a very common title in this field. So we don't even see that on here. And there probably will be other job titles you might come across in the field that aren't on this list. There's no point in trying to categorize these roles into the three categories of who am I, what's out there, how do I get there, because another complication to this picture is that job titles can be the same, but the tasks in the job may be very different from one practitioner to the next. So you could have someone who's called an employment counselor, and they may specialize in only doing assessments related to who am I. Someone else may be called an employment counselor, and they may be doing more job development types of activities. And so they may be focused only on the how do I get there stage. Some roles in different agencies or services may specialize in just one part of the model, while others may encompass all three parts of the model. In other words, one-stop shopping. So as you begin to think about your career in the field, and I'm just going to go back to this slide here, as you begin to think about your career in the field, sorry, let me get all of that up on the screen. You want to think about, where would you like the emphasis to be? What would you enjoy the most? You need to be prepared to do all three of these things. Things do change quite often, quite suddenly in the field. So you do need to be, prepared to do any of these activities, and you're fully trained in our program to do all of these activities. But just think about when you go for interviews, find out, you don't necessarily have to show this model to the employer, but think about, where does this role fit into this model? Does it cover all three things? Maybe you like that idea, or you want the emphasis to be more on who am I and what's out there. Maybe you like that idea, or you want to be a resume specialist. How do I get there? So just think about those things in the field as you're looking at different jobs and opportunities, and think about where you would most prefer to be positioned within this model. So I'm going to stop here. This video is long enough for this part 2, and I'm going to go on to the next stage where, the next video, where I look at the Who Am I stage in a little more depth and look at the other 2 stages as well. So please take a break here, and when you're ready, please go on to part 3 of this lecture series.